So today, the case of the crossbow killer is in the news again, and that is because John and Amy Hunt, who are the remaining survivors of their family, are reflecting on the offences that Clifford committed against Carol, Hannah, and Louise in July last year. Now, Louise was in a relationship with Clifford, and one of the things that John and Amy are reflecting on in this interview is how painful it was after these tragic events unfolded, that they had to kind of deal with the press and media talking about all of the red flags and warning signs that Clifford had presented during their relationship, which would suggest coercive control. And this, I think, is an important point. It's quite a painful point to talk about because it intersects with victim blaming. And I think there's a fine line when we look at this between the amount of weight that we put into risk assessments and what that means for victims and families. And with this case in particular, it's very easy after the fact to say there was this history, that these things were kind of potentially red flags at the time. And what they're talking about is how Clifford was in the army for 3 years. His brother was he was an offender who is in prison, although that's not necessarily seen as a risk factor in and of itself. He also, he bought the weapons that he used in the run up to the days before the offence, which is difficult to screen for. And also he had made racist and transphobic comments towards Louise and all about other people. And towards Louise, he made belittling comments about her. Now, the first point is that it's not up to victims or families to be able to risk assess their situations and understand what they should do. That is up to trained professionals. And even when trained professionals carry out risk assessments, they are not fallible. I've seen cases where offenders scored low on risk assessments, but were actually dangerous individuals, and we would put weight into what the victim, the survivor, was telling us rather than just rely on the risk assessment. It has to be everything. And the other point to that is this idea in society that if violent behaviour is present, that is the most important factor, and that will determine whether violent behaviour will occur in the future. This is a really important myth that we need to break down, because risk factors are not linked to the level of physical violence that somebody may have engaged in the past. And in this case, I've found it difficult to really pinpoint any clear history of violence with this offender. But if you want to look at it in terms of what we can learn, what we can see in the patterns of behaviour of this individual that corresponds to other offenders, is that there's a clear sense of entitlement, and there is an attitude that other people don't matter, that he regards them with disdain, and that if people don't measure up to what he thinks is acceptable, then they should be punished. I mean, that is kind of in the broader context, but clearly Louise was in this relationship and ended it for a reason. And if this was the behaviour he was engaging in, if these were the beliefs and the ideas that he was espousing, then that is clear that he is not somebody really to be trusted or to be in an intimate relationship with. However, that does not mean that the safest thing to do is to immediately end that relationship. The safest thing to do in these circumstances is to reach out to other people. It's important to reach out to family, to friends, to be able to talk about what we're feeling, to have it reflected back to us. It's also important to reach out to professionals, because they are the ones who will have an overview, an oversight of what risk might look like, and that they can advocate for you. So those are the most important things, because if there is a plan for you to end a relationship, it's so crucial that you do it as safely as possible. This is even more true if you are cohabiting with a perpetrator. This is key. And this is often where the pressure lies on society towards individuals and families, is around removing yourself from that situation. But we know full well from all of the cases that removing yourself physically from that situation does not necessarily increase your safety. It's really important to look at what are the risk factors with this individual? How can I safety plan around it? And coming back to what I said in the beginning, it's really important to recognise that when we look at things like risk assessments, triggers, red flags, warnings, there is a real risk of putting too much responsibility and onus on the victim, the survivor, the person who is experiencing the offence. As a society, we have got to get to grips with managing the person's behaviour who is offending, or at least engaging in behaviour which is negatively impacting on the other person, and looking at what we can do to manage that. I could talk for ages on this. I've already kind of gone over time, but if you agree, hit like, share and follow for more content.